Hello, 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 Reza. How are you today?
I'm good, Shay. How are you doing?
I am doing well. I'm doing well. It is another episode of Future Forward. How do you feel?
Yeah, Shay, we're continuing our city edition uh that we started on a few months ago. And last week we did Atlanta, and you teased that you were going to do San Antonio because the same week I was in Atlanta, you were in San Antonio for a conference. You brought the future forward lens, and this is going to be a really interesting episode because it's a contrast. It's like there's contrasts in this that I can't wait to talk about.
Yeah.
But before we jump in, Shay, let's welcome our listeners to our dedicated core of listeners. Thank you for joining us for Future Forward. And for our new listeners, thanks as well for tuning in. Future Forward is a conversation that Shay and I have been having about cities and systems for many years. And we wanted to bring you into this discussion, really driven by curiosity. And what we try to do is to shape out what we these topics that we talk about cities. We bring this economic and ecological lens to it. We talk about our 21 laws of cities, and in doing so, in each episode we talk about the history of a particular topic. In this case, the topic is a city of San Antonio, and then we'll talk about the present day context and then provide some strategic foresight. And we're going to do what we did with the Atlanta episode is we're going to do some scenario planning for where San Antonio can go. So I can't wait to hear what you're going to bring up about San Antonio, Shay.
Yeah, it's so true that there are contrasts. Yeah, I'm so glad you very quickly picked up on that as we're going through the show notes. So yes, welcome listeners. Today we'll be talking about San Antonio. It's a place I've been to a lot of times. San Antonio has one of those kid-friendly vibes. So the kids we've taken there a few times, but this I'll say is the first time since we started doing Future Forward that I went without kids with the Future Forward lens on. So I'll start from the past, the history of San Antonio. It's definitely um, one that's grown a lot. In the 1940s, San Antonio had about 400,000 people. But historically, the history of San Antonio is really tied to the Alamo. And I'll give a very short history of the Alamo. And the Alamo began as Mission San Antonio de Padua in 1718, and it was established by Spanish missionaries to convert local Native American populations. By the early 1800s, it had become a military outpost. And the moment we all know San Antonio for, the most famous moment of San Antonio, was in 1836 during the Texas Revolution, when a small band of Texan defenders, and granted, this is the story as told from the perspective of the Texan defenders, so take it for what you will. There's this saying that history is as told by the conquerors. So we'll leave it at that. These Texan defenders, James Bowie, William Travis, Davy Crockett, people that get a lot of airtime by historians who talk about San Antonio. They held out for 13 days against the Mexican army led by General Santa Anna, and the fall of the Alamo became a rallying cry. Remember, the Alamo is the cry, and it's sort of this thing that now comes up again as it relates to Texan independence, and it has cemented its place in American law. Fast forward to, as I mentioned, to the 1940s. A city of 400,000 people then is now 1.5 million people today, which makes it the second largest city in Texas. That's the
Oh,
stat that stunned me the most. Yeah. For how unreported San Antonio is, it is the second largest city in Texas. I'll pause there because some of the things I want to share now are really more about today,
yeah.
but I'd love your comments. But the point here being that the military history of San Antonio still plays out in the current day and the growth in San Antonio. And dare I say, some of the struggle it has today. But I'd love your comments before I get into.
Yeah. So great introduction. You know, San Antonio, as you put very well, sort of has this lore, right? It's a story. And you know, narratives are very compelling for us as humans. We love stories, and the story of San Antonio is a very interesting one. And I remember going to San Antonio, you know, when I first moved to Austin, and I was in grad school, and I went with some of my grad school friends, you know, from other countries. You know, when we went to the Alamo, I'm sorry to say we were underwhelmed. Like we
Oh
thought
yeah,
it was going to be so much more than what it was, and we were just like, "What? We've heard all about this Alamo thing, but this is a pretty
yeah,
small space, you know, it's a pretty
yeah,
small place." So it's interesting this contrast between, you know, where it situates itself in the narrative of Texan history
yeah.
and what it actually is as a city. And I know that you're going to bring this up a little further, but like one of the things that you know, one of the laws that fits into this section, and we're weaving it into every section for this episode, is that, you know, urban scaling predicts city performance. And you brought up really that San Antonio is the second largest city in Texas after Houston. And our law states as cities grow, their economic and social outputs increase faster than the population itself, but only if resources are allocated efficiently. And I know that when we segue to this next part about present day, we will see that it hasn't scaled in the way that you would have expected, and this is the contrast of San Antonio. So I
Absolutely.
can't wait for you to jump into this next part, Shay.
I love that you teed it up that way. It is a classic example of the growth law, Reza. The 1940, I mean, there were 400,000 people in San Antonio. And 2025, today, as we say, record this, it is more than three times that number, 1.5 million. It's about 500,000 people more than Austin, which gets a lot more airtime than San Antonio. It's the second largest city in Texas, seventh in the US, and it has absolutely not lived up to its potential, unfortunately. The reason why I said earlier that part of its military past might be why is that its growth was really fueled by the fact that it's this strategic location for military presence in Texas. Fort Sam Houston, Lackland AFB, Air Force Base, that is, and Randolph Air Force Base were magnets for federal investment, jobs, and innovation. But those were carved out, not really part of the city as much. And consequently, even as money for the army, defense, and all related military paraphernalia, even as the money has increased, it hasn't totally sipped into the city of San Antonio, even as the population has increased at the same time. And so San Antonio is really more of a city that is anchored around the tourism industry. And the Alamo, as you just mentioned, as I just shared, is one of the biggest draws, but it's not much of a draw. I was there with the boys a few weeks ago. We went for a soccer tournament. It ended 3 days, the weekend. It ended, and the boys were like, we want to go downtown to the Alamo. They'd been, but they wanted to go again. So we went, and as we walked through, I really realized they had forgotten how underwhelming it was because they were expecting more even as we went through. And I can imagine when you have that experience, it's not like Atlanta, which we did in the last episode. I will go to Atlanta. If I go to Atlanta 5 times in a year, I will end up in different places
Mm-hmm.
those 5 times.
Yeah.
Not the case in San Antonio for as much. So the tourism sector is where it's anchored around. The Riverwalk is a prominent part of this. It is an economic multiplier, but again, very dense, just that. It's
Mm-hmm.
the Riverwalk, the Alamo, and you're almost done. So even as it sprawls, because that's happening now, even as it sprawls, there's this tension between It's a dense central city location where you can walk. After the first day of the conference, I walked around, and downtown is very walkable, even as cars blaze through, but it's very walkable. Some of the roads actually have the cobblestone on the road itself. And so you drive across cobblestone roads where you can also walk. But the minute you leave the like 2 to 3 square mile dense part of downtown, it very quickly starts to show sprawl.
Yeah.
And there's that tension there between density and car centricity
Mm.
that you have. The GDP per capita has lagged behind most other major metros. The untapped potential is what that speaks to. Over 90% of residents in San Antonio are car dependent, which causes more spend on energy and infrastructure. There's very little public transit, even though it's making strides. There's the Via Metropolitan Transit, which, yes, you've seen a 22% increase in transit ridership and new buses coming online, but that is from a very low number.
Yeah.
So 22% sounds impressive, but when you're talking about a city of 1.5 million people and only in the tens of thousands do people actually ride the public transport systems, then you're not really impacting the population as much as you could with only 2.2% of commuters biking. Just for those who love to bike, that's pretty low number. The city itself has committed $2.3 billion to infrastructure bonds, with that money being allotted to rapid transit, smart traffic signals, and new pedestrian plazas, which, again, I hope, and we'll talk about this in the strategic foresight section, it is to expand the density that exists in the middle of the city, not just make it even more dense.
Yeah.
You want to take away some of the sprawl by increasing the square mileage that can be considered as downtown. And then there's a lot of hype and activity, some of it justified in the Pearl District, which is this trying to make it a separate downtown with restaurants, converted buildings, and warehouses. And the homes around the Pearl District haven't caught up to the Pearl District.
Mm.
And it's the classic tale of gentrification
Mm.
that is making that part of the city less affordable for the residents, but people moving into the city with more means can move to the Pearl District and think they're in San Antonio, even as they erode some of the culture. So the city is at a crossroads. I like it. It's a toned down version of the more quirky parts of Austin,
Mm.
but it has a long way to go. Is it going to double down on the sprawl, which is really problematic, or invest in transit systems to drive efficiency and livability? So I'd love your comments here, Reza, and the laws as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So Shay, I think that is a very interesting situation for San Antonio. Like high car dependence, low public transit, sprawl, trying to invest in infrastructure. A couple observations. When I went to see one of my daughter's Ollie's band events last year, that was in San Antonio. I spent the day, I went to the San Antonio Museum of Art, and then I walked along the Riverwalk to the Pearl District. And two things struck me. One was, wow, this was a really great experience. I could walk along the Riverwalk. It was very walkable. And I enjoyed this, how you're describing, like downtown's very walkable. But I also realized, like the Pearl District, as you mentioned, trying to make this mixed use development. But what it came across to me was it was a mixed use development for visitors,
Yeah.
for tourists,
Yeah.
not for the people that live there. And so
Yeah.
it seemed like it's been planted there, but not integrated into the rest of the city. And so for me as a visitor, I had a fantastic experience. I was like, wow, this is a great place to visit. I really enjoyed myself,
Yeah.
but I couldn't see it in the fabric of the city. It wasn't woven into the rest of the city's fabric, which was
Absolutely.
an interesting situation
Dichotomy.
from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other, the other thing that I've thought about San Antonio is that, it's always there down on the highway from Austin, but always known as a tourist destination.
Uh-huh.
Whenever people come to Texas, they're like, well, what is there to do in Austin? But there's a ton of stuff to do in San Antonio. And I'm like, okay. And I feel a little bad because I love Austin so much. I'm like, you don't know what you're missing in Austin. You're missing, the real deal of,
Uh-huh.
a city that's thriving with a great population here. Nothing to diss on San Antonio, but
Yeah,
it is a tourist magnet, and it's good economically, but I'm not sure, as we're seeing here, it's not quite the sustainable economic and ecological situation for them. So I want to bring up the laws that address this situation. One is urban density drives efficiency. If you have higher density, when it's thoughtfully planned, it reduces cost and environmental impact. And that's San Antonio has this choice about which direction to go.
yeah,
The second one is sustainable transportation improves livability. And so if San Antonio prioritizes transit, cycling, walking over cars, it'll lead to a more sustainable and equitable city. I mean, 90% commuting by car, the level of poverty that San Antonio has, it's definitely not the best situation for economically disadvantaged population. And then the last point here, social equity underpins urban sustainability, which is to underline the equitable access to resources is a fundamental for a thriving city. And we brought this up a little bit in the Atlanta episode, but this is like even more magnified over here in San Antonio just because they're not setting up systems for that social equity to take place. If you don't have good transportation systems, if you don't have good infrastructure systems, you're going to make the city more difficult for the citizens to thrive within.
absolutely,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
really glad you picked those laws, Shay. They really bring it to light.
And thank you so much for sharing those and sort of providing additional framing there. One thing I realized I didn't share when I was talking about the GDP for San Antonio, which underpins your point, Reza, is that Midland, Texas, which is considered the highest GDP per person in the US,
Mm,
the GDP per person for Midland, Texas is $228,000 per person. San Antonio is 56,000. San Antonio doesn't even show up in the top, I think like 80 or so, even as it is number 7 in terms of number of residents in the population. So
it's the
again,
contrast.
it's
It's
the
the contrast.
contrast. It's the contrast. And as I move now into sort of the strategic foresight side of things, I'll quickly drop some additional stats and then dive into the new format that you did during the last episode that I really like and will probably incorporate more now. Equity challenges in San Antonio is that you mentioned poverty levels. The stat here is that 28.5% poverty rate. That is 1 in every 3 residents of San Antonio in almost 1 in every 3 lives below the poverty line.
Yeah,
That is
yeah,
unacceptable
staggering.
for any city. And while the city is doing a lot, the decade of downtown with the 2.1 billion investment I mentioned, the San Antonio Tomorrow plan, there's a lot of work going into trying to address it. It's a majority Latino population, income, housing, digital access, all these multiple systems under the system of the city all have to be addressed. And so we're talking about a complex problem, a wicked problem in some cases. The digital divide is high. 38% of households lack broadband. 2 of every 5 homes does not have broadband access.
That's crazy.
It's insane. And that limits access. There's a lot of money being spent on regional sustainability with some climate resilience efforts, but again, more needs to go into fixing the problems in San Antonio. And I don't think the money is being spent. There's not enough money being spent. Again, only one source of real income into the city. It's tourism. As you can imagine, that went to zero during COVID and the city is still recovering from that. A few of the stores along the shops along the Riverwalk
Yeah.
never opened
Wow.
once pandemic ended. So the strategic sort of the positive futures will go future possibilities here. San Antonio as a model of inclusive urban prosperity, where San Antonio takes the cultural heritage, the diversity of its demographics, and the fact it is actually a strategic location. It is strategically positioned in Texas and quite easily accessible from the other major cities as well. It could focus on affordable housing for all, taking and borrowing from the Vienna project, Greater Copenhagen project. The Vienna project that is all around building social housing is the idea here. A serious emphasis on universal broadband access and digital literacy, spending some of the money, or even just creative ways, working with corporate partners to increase the literacy levels in the city. The urban core is already vibrant, but instead of just paying as much attention as the city is paying to the District, to do a lot more of almost honestly connecting the current downtown and Pearl District by developing a wider swath of what should now be known as downtown instead of this separate and unequal approach that it's taken.
Mm.
And consequently, to make all those things happen, there needs to be a concerted effort to build electrified transit networks, safe cycling infrastructure, connecting all the neighborhoods, but not just through roads and expressways. San Antonio has a lot of expressways,
Yeah.
but that needs to change. The cultural heritage, festivals, food markets, public art, it's a lot of public art. I failed to mention that. Foster that and increase that to bring more interest and more people to San Antonio. So that's the first possible future. The second one is the outcome would be not so great
Mm-hmm.
if San Antonio continues to keep business as usual right now, where it's growing rapidly but unevenly, and the infrastructure, equity, and sustainability challenges are ongoing. That would not be a great future path, because what would happen there is continued sprawl, which, as we shared, is not working. Strained public service, which is just lagging behind the population growth so much. When we first moved to Austin, I would complain about, oh man, there's no public transport. And we moved from Chicago, which has one of the best public transit systems in the US.
Mm.
And I would complain about Austin, and then I visited San Antonio. It's like, wow, I didn't realize it could get worse. And it could get worse if the city leadership continue with business as usual, because it will continue the inequities that you so like clearly shared earlier, Reza. And yes, there's some money being spent in incremental progress, parks, some transit, downtown revitalization. But I truly think there should be exponential effort, not just what is currently going on. But hey, if they keep it as business as usual, things will worsen. And the tourism, which hasn't quite recovered from COVID, and the military influence will continue to keep the city in this state of tension, is maybe the best way to talk about it. And then the third sort of future scenario is a resilient green San Antonio, is how we've chosen to frame it, where a lot of money is spent on rising to the challenge of climate change, and just the river walk, the river literally flows through the city.
Mm-hmm.
Make that part of, or even the core of, the resilience building of the city, is how I
Mm.
was thinking about it as I was pulling it up, as city like Amsterdam has done. Amsterdam is a resilient city,
Yeah.
and they've built around the river,
Yeah.
with the river, to make it climate resilient. And that has led to a lot more tourism as well. So this is like that loop we always talk about, Reza. The more
Yeah.
you pay attention to resilience, the stronger you get. And then when disaster happens, we hope it doesn't, but resilience is recovering better
Yeah.
when disaster happens. San Antonio can build around the river to make it a resilient city, circular urban metabolism where waste reduction, recycling, and local food systems all work hand in hand. It's in San Antonio is in Beja County, if I remember correctly, and working with other towns in Beja County will help with the regional cooperation thing we always talk about. And again, these three scenarios that we're mentioning all center around a very clear direction towards working electrified transportation systems. I think if we leave everything else, fixing the transportation system will lead to a lot of addressing a lot of the problems the city is currently facing. And so there's that future possibility where San Antonio leverages the rivers and the greenway system and becomes a model for climate adaptation, even as the rest of Texas, for some reason, in some places, I mean, seem to be moving in the opposite direction. San Antonio could take leadership here due to the centrality of the river.
I love how you shared this, Shay. These are really great ways of San Antonio taking advantage of its advantages, right?
Yeah.
So if I were to summarize, you have your first scenario, which is this inclusive urban prosperity, and it's taking advantage of this angle of Latino heritage, vibrant downtown. And the key laws and lessons are the social equity, the mixed land use, and the digital inclusion, really to set San Antonio on this thriving path. And then the last one, the third one, which I think is another really good framing, I loved it, which is this resilient green San Antonio. Really, the angle is the river, the greenways, the riverwalk, and being a leader in climate adaptation and really taking the lead on that. And the key laws there are, climate resilience, urban greening, and the regional cooperation. And then the one in the middle, which is the business as usual scenario two, it'll just end up being like any other Sunbelt sprawling city. And it can continue to focus on tourism and military, but you're not going to get these other advantages that can come from what San Antonio already has and put it on a better path that it is right now,
Yeah.
on. I mean, you brought up some really very disturbing statistics. I mean, it's just like, I didn't realize that, you get a sense when you go to San Antonio that it's it feels different. Like the moment you drive into San Antonio, you just feel like it's a different place
Yeah.
than it is Houston or Austin or Dallas or what have you. It's been limited. It's been limited by various factors that have its history that have led to what it is today. But it has some advantages, being the seventh largest city in the country, to really take the lead in these two possible directions that you proposed, and become a more thriving city. So fantastic job, Shay. I loved it.
Thank you. No, I borrowed your framing from the last Atlanta episode, and it really did share some led to some stark realizations that while we've shared the business as usual future possibilities, that absolutely should not be the one the city chooses here. If there's any San Antonio leader listening to this, business as usual will not work. It will not lead to a thriving city or a sustainable city for its residents. And that is, as I'm sure most of our listeners agree, that is not the future we want for the cities that we live in and care about. So I'm glad we got the opportunity to do two city episodes back to
Yeah.
back as a result of recent travel, and the lens of Future Forward and the laws have really made visiting. We both really enjoyed traveling before now, and I think this has really stepped it up for
Yeah.
us as well.
Yeah, as I mentioned to you, as I was in the Uber back to the airport in Atlanta, I already started researching for this episode because I was like, man, I can't wait, like all these things in my head, and I just want to start putting it down in our podcast notes. So I can't wait for the next one, Shay. I'll be going to Houston at some point this summer, and so I can't wait to do an episode on Houston. But yeah, this has been a really good addition to our podcast repertoire. We both really enjoyed doing it. And for our listeners that are curious or have feedback, feel free to comment on our YouTube or LinkedIn, or send us an email to hello@futureforward.fm. We really appreciate you listening. Like and subscribe, rate and review. Share this episode with someone that you know in San Antonio that might enjoy this. And, until our next episode, thank you. And thank you, Seyi. That was a fantastic one. Look forward to the next episode that we do.
Thanks so much, and bye, listeners. We'll see you soon.
All right. Bye.